Okay, Jim, I think everyone is in from the waiting room.
All right, let me move one thing here. Yeah, all right. All right, well, welcome everyone to the third installment of Land Management Quarterly for the 2025 year. My name is Jim Jansen. I'm here with Anastasia Meyer, and we'll be the instructors for today's session. And as people are coming in here, I know there's always a few that trickle in here past noon. We have a little bit of housekeeping items to address, and we'll go over a brief outline and our contact information as well. So once again, my name is Jim Jansen. Anastasia Meyer will take the lead in the second half of today's presentation. And if you'd like to get a hold of us, the contact information provided on here is also at the last slide of today's presentation as well. And the phone numbers listed are direct numbers to each of us, as well as our direct email address. So you're more than welcome to reach out to us at any time. In a given time, you'll see that we have some in-person meetings coming up, so it might be a little bit harder to get a hold of us. But we would be more than happy to visit with anyone attending today one-on-one with different types of questions you folks might have. And today's outline, what we have for August 18th, I got to double check you. It is the 18th. August is moving fast. We kind of have a three-part meeting planned. So the first part today, we're going to be highlighting some of the information we have found from the 2025 Nebraska Farm Real Estate Market Survey and Report that is conducted by the University of Nebraska. Anastasia will be taking the second lead. We have some different things coming up in terms of deadlines and things to be watching out for as we have a crop that's rapidly progressing here this summer. And then the third part, we had a few questions submitted to us, and we will be highlighting those questions as part of our Ask an Expert section. So everyone is welcome to ask any questions in the chat or Q&A pane on Zoom, and we'll be sure to highlight those questions as we're going along as well. So the first part here, let's go ahead and take a look at what is happening to land values and cash rents. And we'll be primarily taking a cash rent. So each year, just as a reminder, this is kind of a slide that appears at least one or two other times throughout the year, but the University of Nebraska does a survey of those folks that work in the land industry. This includes people such as appraisers, farm managers, bankers, people that work in the financial world that surround land. Each year we do two different things. We do what is called the preliminary results, or the preliminary estimates are published in the middle of March. And then the final report is actually published in June. And the final report gives a snapshot, just not the preliminary estimates, but an also final summary on what is occurring surrounding the land industry with respect to a lot of statistics surrounding land sales, who's buying, who's selling land, things like that. All the information we're highlighting today can be found at the Center for Ag Profitability website at cap.unl.edu/real estate. The other option is if you're having a problem finding it on our website and you would prefer a in-person copy handed to you, you can always stop by your local library. Many librarians can help you find it, and also your local extension office. There are 70 plus extension offices across the state. Many of them can either print out a copy, or many have a few pages usually printed out, hanging out, and their keys go up in the front of the extension office. So be sure to take a look at it. And how the University of Nebraska information is summarized is we summarize the state of Nebraska into 8 different regions. These regions reflect different production attributes. These regions are also called crop reporting districts. And you'll see if you look across the state, all the 93 different counties that we have here, we have the eastern third of the state tends to kind of trend together. And then the 5 regions of the western 2/3, those tend to trend together as well with respect to yield expectations, soil type, and the geography of what makes up the state. So a few things to keep an eye on. One thing that many people are always interested in is they're always wanting to know what's happening to land values. And this is the only slide we have on land values today. And I think without a question, at least on the cropland side, there might be a little pressure being placed on the market, given that we have all the expectations, or the prices are maybe a little bit tighter than what we've seen in recent years. And with that being said, we're starting to see that reflected in the farm real estate market. And as with that being said, we've seen about a 2% decline on the market value of agricultural land across Nebraska. Now, the one thing to keep in mind here is that 2% decline is foreshadowed or somewhat overlooks that we did actually see an increase in the market value of grazing land and hay land. So there's a little bit of a tug of war occurring between the decline in cropland, coupled with a slight increase in grazing land or hay land, the things that support the cow-calf industry. Nonetheless, we're seeing that be reflected here. We notice a slight decline that reflects a somewhat similar trend to what we've seen about a decade ago around the 2012 to 13-14 period. And what are we facing right now? And I haven't updated the slide here in a week or two, but we are seeing that the marketing year average price, MYA price here, for corn, soybeans, things like that, prices for corn are pretty close to break even right now, if not below it for some folks. So that's the challenge that we're going to be facing this fall. Yes, we are expecting favorable yields. We're also experiencing a time that we might have lower prices than what we had hoped for, and they're at least lower than what they were, say, fall of 24, fall of 23. Now, we bring that to your attention because we have to talk a little bit about cash rents. And I know many folks probably have their 2025 cash rents wrapped up. And I always tell people cash rents is you're setting a cash rental rate for one point in time. And you may be setting that cash rent here the fall of 25 for the 2026 season. Maybe you don't set your cash rent until March of 2026. Irregardless, it's important to be aware of some of the trends that we're seeing. And what we see here for the 2025 growing season, we're noticing a slight decline across the state, anywhere from 2 to 7%, depending on what region you're in. And we are also seeing a breakdown on cash rents. So on the prior slide, we had the average. The average appears as an A on this slide. And we also have what stands for this HAL acronym, which is the average of the high grade and average of the low grade. The average of the high grade and average of the low grade is really the average of the upper third of cash rents and the average of the lower third of cash rents. So overall, we noted a slight decline depending upon where you're at in Nebraska with regards to the cash rents. And what are some of the things that are influencing cash rents, especially on cropland this time of the year? Well, some of the things, and I don't have a slide on this, but some of the things I would mention is one is the quality of the land. You have a nice square field that's properly configured for larger machinery. You have a property that maybe has some geographical challenges with respect to having a large hill. Some of it might be poorly drained, or maybe some of it's sandy. It's not that it's a bad property, but it might create some challenges with respect to the management of the property overall. Nonetheless, so those are two things. So soil type, degree of slope. What else influences a cash rent? Market competitiveness. How willing are people to bid up the cash rental rates? Those might be influenced by one, crop yields, which I would say on average here, at least in eastern Nebraska, we have had fairly favorable rainfall. I guess we'll see how the year ends out. Some of the other areas of the state are a little bit dry, but rainfall, I think at least in the eastern part of the state, is a little bit more plentiful than what we were expecting, say around March 15th, or excuse me, May 15th during planting season. We also have to account for, beyond rainfall, the prices. Price for corn, soybeans, wheat, oats, small grains, specialty crops, depending on what you're raising. With this favorable yield for corn, I think the USDA had some recent reports out that we expect some favorable yields. The expectation for the price of corn, soybeans, things like that, maybe not as good as what we had been hoping for. So those might be some of the factors or forces weighing down on cash rents, cropland, in addition to input prices. I think depending on what you're using, seed, fertilizer, chemicals, might see a little bit better discounts, but all those things are influencing the profitability of farming and ranching and the willingness of people to bid up or pay or reflect in some of these cash rents that we have shown here on this screen. Switching gears a little bit, the University of Nebraska also reports on gravity irrigated in addition to center pivot irrigated cropland. And these cash rental rates assume that the landlord owns the entire irrigation system. Okay. So what do we see across the state? Well, you notice some slight declines. We might say cash rents are moderating to some degree. And in addition to the average that we have here, we have this range from the high grade down to the low grade with the overall average. So we ask ourselves, what influences cash rents? Why are we seeing some of the things that we're seeing? All the things we mentioned before, quality of the land, market prices, input expenses, all these things influence the irrigated cash rents, in addition to the quality of the irrigation system. And what I mean by that is, do you have an irrigation system that's very well maintained, a good steady water supply? You don't have hard water, rusty water, or water that might have some restrictions during the drought. All those things influence the cash rents that we see here on this slide and the willingness for people to pay according to that. Now, if you have a situation where a tenant provides a center pivot, for example, and we actually did some survey work on this a couple of years ago, if the tenant is the individual providing the pivot, we would see a cash rent that would reflect a little bit lower, because the irrigated cash rents are just not a return on the land, but they're for the upkeep, maintenance, and depreciation of the irrigation system. Our phone calls would also tend to reflect that, if the tenant's the one providing all the above ground, so let's say they provide the pivot, but the landlord still owns the well, they own the land, they own the power unit. If the tenant's the one providing the pivot, we see a discount off the irrigated cash rent, given current expenses, anywhere from that $25 to $45 range. I think 35 is fairly common. So say, for example, here in, let's say you were in the East District, 345 an acre, assuming the landlord owns the entire irrigation system. Take $35 an acre off that, or $40 an acre. So you might see a cash rent, say, from 310 to 305 or something, to account for the tenant providing the pivot. And if the tenant provides just not the pivot, but also provides the power unit. So when we say a power unit, you might think of a diesel engine, electric motor, or even a natural gas engine of some type, natural gas or propane. Under those cases, I'd say anywhere from 5 to 15, kind of that $10 an acre might be a sweet spot. Tenant, assuming the landlord owns everything else, if the tenant's providing the power unit, maybe you take 10 bucks off an acre here in the Central District, for example, and instead of getting 285 an acre, you get 275. So that might be something to be aware of. Now, onto the grazing land, and for the sake of having a somewhat consistent talk, or a talk that's going to be trying to boil down to the main points, you can rent land on a per acre basis, animal unit basis. I tend to talk a little bit more about a cow-calf pair basis. I didn't include the percent change here, but what I will note is, unlike the cropland industry, beef prices are fairly good right now compared to where they were, say, 3 years ago. And with those prices being reflected here, we're seeing prices anywhere from that. This is one cow, one calf for 1 month during the summer's grazing season. So say, for example, let's see here in the Central District, it was $70 a pair. 70 times 5 would be reflective of, say, 350 a pair. And what influences that grazing land cash rental rate? Once again, quality of the land. Maybe you have a parcel of ground that's exceptionally wet. That would make it hard to farm, but it makes a really, really good piece of ground for grazing cattle. Okay. Weed control, who's providing it? Is the landlord or the tenant? It's a negotiable element of the lease. Upkeep on fences. Once again, who's maintaining that? Is it the landlord or the tenant? There's a lot of upkeep surrounding grazing land, hay land even. That might include a lot of that sweat equity. And that's where we see that get bid into the cash rents. Sometimes you might have an older farming couple or ranching couple that has grazing land. Maybe the cows got sold due to their age, but they want to maintain that property in a way that they see consistent. They want to maintain it because their tenant, maybe they live an hour and a half from where the property is. That's fine. But maybe the landlord isn't necessarily taking cattle in, but they're providing some degree of service surrounding the lease, maintaining the fences, keeping down the brush, spraying thistles, whatever. That's why we're seeing these influence or bid into some of the cash rents. One of the questions we had sent in, there was an individual asking in the Springfield, Nebraska area, which is historically a heavy row crop area, asked what might my property rent for a smaller grazing land site. Well, you can set a rental rate based on the per acre or per pair basis. We're providing you the per pair basis here. If it's a little bit smaller property, say maybe you're going to run some horses on it, you might look at a per acre basis. And I would refer you to take a look at the Farm Real Estate Report for 2025. And that can give you a little bit of a snapshot on the cash rents on a per acre basis. A little bit new addition we have here is where before we get transitioned over to Anastasia, on hunting lease comparisons, what are some of the major wild types of wild game that people are leasing their hunting rights out? So say, for example, let's say I'm renting my land to Anastasia. Anastasia isn't a hunter. So I decide to lease my hunting rights for, say, antelope, deer, pheasants, turkey, waterfowl, maybe even something else to a third party. What's the most common type of animal, wild game that people are leasing the hunting rights out on? It's not to say that if you lease the hunting rights out on a parcel of land for deer, you might still have pheasant out there. But if you're explicitly leasing out the rights, it seems to, based on survey results, that antelope and deer were the most common. And while we do see there are some areas of the state that maybe, for example, waterfowl along the central parts of the east and even the northwest, maybe that greater Platte Valley along the Platte River, you see a little bit of an interest in that. Pheasant and quail, you see a little bit more interest in the southern areas, maybe even in northeast Nebraska. So it just depends where you're at. So we kind of took a snapshot at there, but overall, the highest value or one of the most common ones that we see people leasing a property out for with respect to wild game would be deer. And what are the attributes? What are the things that contribute the most value to hunting leases? Well, the first one is vegetative cover. So do you have a parcel of ground that has, maybe you want corn stalks if you have pheasant or something. Maybe you want a lot of trees and brush if you have deer. Location, so the type of vegetation and the type of water access. Those are the two greatest factors, followed by the topography. Is it a flat field? Is it a gently rolling, hilly, whatever? And then even the conservation or some other factors or forces. When we say conservation practices, maybe it's a parcel of land that has some CRP on it or some set aside acres where you purposely plant some type of cover crop that would be targeted towards your certain type of wild game. That'd be another example of conservation practices. And how much do you generate from leasing out hunting rights? Now, the type of questions we put on our survey, we didn't ask, do you charge per wild animal? Do you charge per day, per month, per season, per year? We just asked a general. And what we found was the majority of the leases tend to be between that $0 to about $2,500. That accounted for about 2/3. And then 2,500 to 5,000 accounted for about the other third. So that accounted for greater than 90%. Now, there were some outliers where you've seen some exceptional amounts, but these two accounted for the two greatest values associated with it. So this might be, you might have someone, say you had a pair of two individuals that want to go hunting for deer. Maybe they're willing to pay 2,500, or excuse me, maybe they're willing to pay $1,000 a deer. They want to harvest two wild deer on the property. So that's just to give you some ideas, if on the cropland side of things, if cash rents are going to be getting a little bit tighter here because of declining corn or soybean prices, what are some alternative methods that we could be using to generate income off of property? Well, this is just one of those things right here. So, and as a reminder here, as Anastasia gets transitioned over, you can type in a question to the webinar chat. And there's also, she also posted in there where you can find Farm Real Estate Report. So Anastasia, do you want to go ahead and get switched over?
Yes, I will. Okay. Is everybody seeing my screen and hearing me all right? Must be. I'm not getting anything from the chat. Awesome. Okay, so my name is Anastasia Meyer. I'm on the southeast part of the state. And Jim and I usually work together, and I just always like to bring up this landlord tenant communication aspect. We always want to improve or maintain those relationships that are built. So, the okay, so now is a sorry, skip that one. Now's a great time to be checking out what's going on with your land. Check out what your lease says, check out your land. Consider going out for a visit. When was the last time you saw your land? A lot of times we are seeing that a lot of the new people inheriting land, they haven't even been out to their property for a while. Maybe it's been years, maybe it's been months, but go ahead and try and invite them out. See what's going on in your land. It's a great time to be discussing about what are you facing out there. Do you need to be changing anything? Do you need to change from a crop share to a cash rent? Is there some issues out in the field that you need to address, like their conservation issues? Some tile work needs to be done. How's the irrigation equipment? How are you guys managing the repairs on everything? Being out there together, it's easier to explain to one another what needs help and come to a mutual agreement that you guys can work together. So if you're seeing any weeds, disease, pressure, anything like that, great time to explain to them what's going on. Hopefully, we just got a rain today, so hopefully a good part of you guys did as well, and you can say that, yeah, we're looking for some good yields. Crop prices could be a lot better though, but we're never happy. So things to observe again. Cropland, make sure that you don't have any wet spots that are showing up year and year and year again. You're Go ahead and discuss what crop rotations you're planting. What's growing, why do you grow those? Talk about, the whole planting. Let's not assume that everybody knows what's going on in your area. Um, be don't be afraid when people ask those questions. Be willing to educate everybody. And then grazing lands, it's a great year to go out into your pastures and to see if your pastures are being adequately grazed. We've Most of the state has been receiving rain. So if there's overgrazing, that's going to be very present this year. Because drought isn't as much of a factor as it has been in the past. So go ahead and check your grass, right? We always encourage leaving some of the grass for next year's regrowth, reestablishing. Um, if you leave some grass out there, you're not going to have as much weed pressure. So make sure that the grass is of adequate height, that you don't need to adjust something. So maybe if one section of the pasture is really being grazed hard, maybe you think of some cross fencing and do some rotational grazing. Again, you don't know that unless you're out there and take a drive, check out your property, see if things need to change. So if things need to change, you might have some flexibility, it might not, depends on what you're in. So if you have a verbal lease, we're going to be talking about how to terminate that. If you have a written lease, it's all going to go back to what you have in that lease. So we encourage, regardless if you had a 10-year standing history or a new tenant, that all your leases be in writing. It protects both parties, the landowners and the tenant. So if you have a verbal lease, how do you go about changing it? Well, in Nebraska, you have to terminate that lease 6 months prior to March 1. So by September 1, you have to have terminated that tenant to go from a crop share to a cash rent, to go from a verbal to a written lease. You have to terminate it or change any of these things by September 1. Pasture leases are a little bit different. They don't require that 6-month time frame. If you're keeping your tenant, go ahead and give them a heads up saying, hey, you're going to be getting this termination notice. It's just a legal formality, but we're going to change X, Y, and Z. Talk to them. It's going to reduce a lot of potential areas for miscommunication and some panicking and wondering what's going on here. So give them that heads up if you're going to keep them. And if you're not going to keep them, it's okay. You just send them that letter. You have to have it done by September 1 in their hands. Why have a written lease? Well, I just want to remind everybody that it's not real unless it's in writing. So that written lease is going to carry a higher value if you go to court. It's not going to be a he said, she said situation. Everything should be spelled out pretty clearly so that each party knows what they are responsible for in this lease. Now, how long you structure is going to be really between you and the other party. But in case one person dies, whoever is coming in to manage your estate or take over the land or the farming operation, whatever the case might be, they know what they are responsible for. And it reduces a chance of some misunderstandings and some resentment and hurt feelings to come about because you know that you are responsible for X, Y, and Z, or this is how much you should be paid, and the other person knows the opposite as well. It's rather prevalent that when a long-standing farmer or landowner passes away, and the person inheriting that lease, whether verbal or written, and they haven't signed it and they haven't filed it away, um, they don't know how much you're paying, so you have to go through bank statements. So let's sign that written lease. Let's review it periodically, so that both parties know what they are responsible for. So, what should you be putting in a lease? Well, do you have any conservation practices? When I'm talking to people, I urge people to be cautious on their wording. So, for example, here, if you have no-till ground and you want it to stay no-till, if you put in a lease that it has to stay no-till, legally, they can't go in and work the backsides of terraces or any loading areas that might have compaction. So be conscientious of what you're putting in your lease. Um, if you have any non-crop land, what's that weed control look like? What does it look like in the waterways, in the ditches, in the pastures, whatever it might be? But what does your weed control look like? Are you requiring your tenants to mow those road ditches? If you want them to, put it in that lease. When should payments occur? I always encourage that payments are split, some right at the signing or around planting time, and some at the around the end of harvest or October timeframe, whatever you guys agree upon. But we always know taxes are due twice a year, and so that's why we say split it up. And also, then the tenant isn't carrying that all the cash rent on the operating note for the majority of the year. Be also thinking about when termination occurs. Do you have to give them a termination, or just whenever this is done, it's done? We don't need to have this conversation again. Um, you're going to get a new contract every single year. Be careful how you are wording that. A lot of times we have these carryover leases, and you don't want to go through and retype it up, so you just sign it at the bottom of the page. If you don't have how termination is going to be given, that paper is worthless. If you go to court, it's going to go back to the verbal lease law. Any other provisions? A lot of times we see people forgetting about corn stalks. Should they be charging for corn stalks? Are you allowing other people to charge for corn stalks? Cover cropping. My advice with cover crops is, why are you having them planted? Is the landowner encouraging it? Is the tenant encouraging it? Depends on who pays for it. Be ready to have those negotiations. When should you be renegotiating? I encourage everybody to be thinking about it at the same time. So have it in your lease saying every year in August, we're going to come and talk about, am I renting this again? If so, how much? Um, have that hard deadline in there, because a lot of times it's really easy to say we're going to do it next week, we're going to do it next week, then all of a sudden that month has passed and half the year has passed, and we still haven't talked about it, and maybe the crops are already in the ground. So you don't have to use that September 1 as a deadline if you have a written lease. Just talk to one another, be willing to renegotiate it. Um, Remember, crop inputs change, so do the landowner's costs as well. So both parties will have things that should go up and down. A good standing relationship will be willing to move with each other. So when you go up, some years you might go down. Just something to think about there. So if you need a lease, if you have a verbal lease, I can't give you a termination letter because Nebraska extension will not allow me to, but there's other resources out there. You should have the date, the addresses of both parties, the legal of the land, and the termination date. Those are just some basics. You can have a lawyer draft it up. You can do your own research, whatever you need to do. But we do have a resource if you want to go to a written lease. If you go to this aglease101.org and you click on that document file, it brings you to this page. On the right-hand side, we have these form fillable PDFs. In my past, I used to say, just go on it, click on, you can sign it, and you're all good. I'm not really recommending that so much now anymore. They've changed a few things, and so I really encourage you to print it out, maybe highlight what you want in it, change what you don't, and then have somebody print it out. The reason why I say this is I think a lot of people just print these off or borrow a lease from someone else. They think they know what they're signing, and then a conflict arises and they don't know it. So a lot of times it comes onto corn stalks. They either have that grazing is not allowed, or there's no subleasing. Know what's in your lease, whether you are creating it and signing it as a tenant or the landowner. Make sure you know what you're signing. Be really reading those thoroughly. Protect yourself. Now we want to go over this next part. It's ask an expert. It's probably some of our favorite, most asked questions that we get. So hopefully this will, if you guys have the same questions, we'll be going through these, and then we'll also be covering some questions that we've gotten over an email at the end.
Okay, so we had, tell you what, let's go back 2 slides just for a second. Let's stay on the intro. We had a few questions come in, Anastasia, and there we go. So, all right. So I'll let you do the first question. Who should be initiating the lease conversation? You want to go to that one or answer that quick?
Yeah, I think whoever wants to initiate it first, I don't know if there's one single right or wrong party to initiate it. If you're the landowner, I think it's okay for you to initiate it. If you're the tenant, I think it's also okay. I think just if you're having questions, initiate it. Doesn't need to be one party or another, simply for the fact of, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know if someone else is having like second thoughts or questions about it. So go ahead and bring it up, regardless of what party should be bringing it up.
Okay, very good. Next question here. I'll try to take a stab at it. Any info on rental rates for yarding cattle in the winter? So if you had a farm site that you maybe had a pen or a facility where cattle, maybe it has corrals that the landlord provides, maybe a windbreak, water tank, things like that. In recent information, I have not seen anything published on this particular topic in about the last 10 years. I tend to see rental rates that are fairly nominal, somewhat similar to what you might see at like a feedlot, for example. I don't know, maybe a quarter to 50 cents a day for the use of the facility per head. The caveat I'll put in there is the tenant needs to be able to go in there and clean that yard up in the spring or summer when weather and time permits. and also they're responsible for any damages. The bigger the animals, sometimes they can be a little rough on things. So that would be my other comment
Mm.
there. All right,
Also
there.
adding to that one, the livestock on the lease publications on the left-hand side of the slide, there is a rental agreement for farm facilities, livestock
Yeah.
facilities. I think yardage is included in this, or at least the dry lot portion of it. But this was done probably 10 years ago, so you're going to need to adjust it to reflect today's market and just inflation.
All right. The other question that was submitted, we're going to hold off on answering that until Anastasia gets through some of her questions. I'll take the first question slide here, and then we'll let Anastasia take on some of the other ones, and I'll be sure to point out the one question here. All right, so these were some questions that were submitted, and first question we have here, how should, we're having a lot of changes right now, a lot of uncertainty surrounding corn, soybean prices, maybe even crop yield. Maybe it's going to be a good year, maybe it's going to be a poor year, depending on where you're at. And surrounding cash rents, I think the biggest concern, at least in corn for a lot of people, is probably not the greatest prices, the prices we had been hoping for. How do we set up a flex lease surrounding that? Well, the idea being, okay, let's say a landlord wants 250 an acre. I'm the tenant. I want to pay 190. How do we set up a cash rent that makes sense for the two of us? Well, under this case, we might set up a flexible cash rent. The basics behind a flexible cash rent is you have to have a minimum amount, you have to have a maximum amount. That's where we see that yellow to green range that we have on this slide right here. And I don't care if the price of corn goes to $10. I don't care if the price of corn goes to $2. Depending on how you have this set up, we have a minimum and we have a maximum. Remember, on the minimum side, assuming it's during the growing season, there are ways that we have a minimum cash rent. And on the maximum side, it doesn't matter if the price of corn goes to $10. If it goes to $10, there's probably some things going on in the market, maybe the extreme drought, for example, where I not as much corn as we'd hoped for. Here on the next slide, if you want to progress, we were going to have one basic example on a flex lease. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Anastasia. And we have two situations here. So we have a farm, and let's say the planting time price guarantee, that's an average associated with insurance policy on corn, crop insurance. And let's say I gave Anastasia 220 an acre. I hope to raise 150 bushel. And when I planted the crop this past spring, I thought I was going to be getting about 466 a bushel this fall. We have two situations here. Left-hand side, the price of corn goes up. Right-hand side, the price of corn goes down. And in fact, on this slide, we maybe should even use a price lower than 421 a bushel. Nonetheless, so this goes to show you on the bottom section there, when you do the calculation on the percent change between the planting and harvesting time prices, we see that we can adjust that cash rent accordingly to reflect some of that. And I think the right-hand side is probably a little bit closer to what we might be seeing this year. And under this case, we're going to pay that in cash rent because remember, we have to stay inside that range. And with that being said, we're going to take a little off the cash rent to reflect a market situation is not as good as we had hoped for. And that's going to be reflected accordingly. Okay, I'll let you take the next couple of slides, Anastasia, and I'll be sure to reiterate any questions that may be submitted by our users. So go ahead.
Yep, thank you. Also, I will apologize. Our great our technology person, he's gone today. So you have Gemini. So if there's some technical difficulties switching between slides, we apologize for that. So, do pasture rental rates vary between seasonal grazing leases and rotational paddock systems, where the livestock are moved in between the paddocks? So remember, the rotational grazing is you split a pasture up and you rotate it through. So because of that, you have a higher grass utilization. You can have some higher stocking rates or maybe potentially graze longer, but it is a lot more labor intensive. They're having to go in and change, a week every few days, depending on how big those paddocks are and how heavily they are stocked. What I have seen in the past is the cash rental rates do not really vary in between whether it is rotationally grazed or not. Um, The management styles differ. You can get some better grazing. It is more work. Look at your pasture, see if it's necessary. A lot of times, maybe if you have a really oddly shaped pasture that they don't go in the corner because it's the furthest away from the water, um, it might be something worth considering. But traditionally, no, we don't see a lot of cash rental rate variances between the two practices.
Very good.
Okay. So I kind of covered this again. So what provisions need to be in the verbal termination letter? So if you are writing a verbal termination letter, you should put in the current date, the addresses of both parties, the legal description of the property, any terms. So if they have a pivot that they own on, when do they need to remove any of their property off by? Um, you also need to have when that termination takes effect. So does it take effect on the last day? If you're terminating a verbal lease, it probably takes into effect the last day of February, whichever day that is. Consider maybe hiring an attorney just to make sure that all of your boxes are checked, especially if the relationship is strained, and then send a certified mail. Why? So that you have that signature saying that yes, they have received it, um, and that you know where you stand on it. You have that documentation. Now, if both parties want to terminate and it is mutual, it may not be necessary to send that letter, but again, it's how much do you want to cover your basis for of what if? What if it goes to court? One of the questions here was if the landlord does not terminate the verbal lease by September 1, do they have to farm it? Well, legally, they have that right option to. But chances are, if the tenant does not want to farm it, they can say, no, I can't take this on this year. And there's going to generally be a tenant ready to step in for you. Um, the key is let's make that decision by that September 1. If you know that you're a tenant and you don't want to farm it next year, let them know so that they can find somebody else as soon as possible, and then they can make sure that they have their inputs covered and all of that.
Yeah, and Anastasia did a good job describing that. The important thing is people may not be thinking about this right now, but especially in times when we have direct low corn, soybean, whatever prices, there's a lot of people that are starting to go to crop production meetings here in the late summer, early fall of 25, and starting to talk about getting inputs lined up, pre-ordering, prepaying, whatever, trying to get better prices. So that's very important with some of this lease termination stuff. If you want to go to a different direction or whatever, be sure to let the other party know. And there are terms and stipulations that she has stated here with the termination of verbal leases. You need to be sure to let the other party know for September 1. And if something else arises, just be aware of that. So that's a good job addressing that question that came in there. Anastasia, go on to the next one.
We're actually going to backtrack a little bit because while we're on this slide, we had a couple questions about what does APH means. That's your average production history. So it's going to be
Yep.
their yields for the last 5, 10 years, however long it is. If you have a lease, technically you cannot ask for prior history. They could share it if they want it, but legally you cannot ask for it if they don't want to give it to you. But you can ask for it on in the future if you have a written lease. And then cover cropping. That was another question that we got as well. And that is, so let's say I harvested my corn and I had some erosion control issues or I wanted to graze cattle. I would go in and plant maybe a rye mixture, maybe wheat, some other mixture if I wanted to get fancy. And so cover cropping, what I mean by that is, are you wanting to graze it or are you wanting it as a landowner for soil erosion control issues? What's the purpose of it? Have that conversation. What I have found is, depending on where you live, cover cropping might be really popular or it might not be. So it might not be applicable to you. Okay, we'll go on.
All right. Next question here, since we're on the slide. what are the usual
Oh,
sources for planting price and harvesting price guarantees for flex leases? In this example that's provided on the slide, Anastasia has highlighted. When we say the planting time price guarantee and the actual harvest time price guarantee, these are prices associated once again with crop insurance. These are two 30-day future price averages, and they are numbers that you can talk to a crop insurance agent. You can find different articles online. I don't care if you use these prices, if you use the local prices at an elevator or a feed yard, wherever the crop ends up going. The important thing is you agree upon what price you will be using with the other person engaged in the flex lease, and you also are picking over a period of time. Just can't use one price on May 1 and one price in October. Whatever day, if you're only using one point in time, there might have been something in the news that caused prices to go way up or way down. If you want to pick the first, every Friday in May, take an average of that compared to every Friday in October or November, sometime around harvest, you can do that. But let's pick those prices over a period of time. Okay. And one other question we'll answer here, and then we'll go back to you covering the final couple other questions that we had, Anastasia. The question, and this kind of gets on with respect to, can I ask a tenant for a copy of the yield history? And there was a question here, can we ask tenants about income and profits and expenses to know more about the ins and outs of farming? And they also want to know this information because maybe there's people that are going to be inheriting the land and they want to have a little bit better understanding surrounding the basis of the property. You can ask for whatever you want in a lease. Just be aware that people are going to be a little bit guarding. The tenants are going to guard this information. One thing, they are a business. They're trying to negotiate. But two, they might be a little bit concerned about some sharing of the crop yield, sharing of the income or expense data, because they might be concerned that as a landowner, you might be shopping around trying to find another person that might be willing to pay a little bit more. So in a flex lease, you have to be forthcoming a little bit more with this information. I have seen flexible lease arrangements where they do the flex based on a profit. If the tenant makes above a certain dollar amount, they split the profit 50-50 or 1/3, 2/3 or something like that. So there's many different ways. Important thing is you have an open line of communication surrounding this so both parties understand. So, okay, Anastasia, why don't you go? I think you had a couple more questions there for you prepared. So go ahead and answer this one.
yep. I'll also piggyback a little bit off of that last question that Jim answered as well. You know, by asking those questions, it's essentially asking, how much do you make? How much is in your bank account? So yeah, there might be a little bit of hesitation in there. Okay, so this question is, if the ground's going to be sold and the current lease ends on February 28th, 2026, does notification need to be given to the tenant on the lease termination? Well, the first question is it in writing? Do you have a written agreement? Because before anything that I say, it's going to be, what does your lease say? Now, let's say that it is a verbal lease. Yes, it needs to be terminated prior to September 1. Otherwise, whoever's going to buy it is going to roll over with a tenant already. And if you're thinking about selling it, it might sell better if you terminate it and it doesn't have a tenant for next year. Okay. And so if your written lease says that it ends on February 28th, does not need a termination letter, then no, you don't need to terminate it. But again, let's talk about this professional courtesy of letting the other party know. Let them know before they go and purchase input. So if you know you're selling it, someone else is farming it, let them know as soon as they know. They might even give you an offer for the land, um, but they can make the proper adjustments. Okay. The next question is, how do you structure a crop share lease arrangement? What provisions need to be in that arrangement? Ag Lease 101 is a great place on where to start, how to structure it, what to think about it, the different provisions that you need to consider, whether it's irrigated, who's covering the repairs on the well, on the pump, on the pivot itself. You need to have those conversations, whether you're in a cash rent or crop share agreement, but this is a good place to start. And then how do you structure it? What do you want to cover? How do you cover it? Well, you need to think about income and expenses. You're going to be having the revenue from the crop sales. If you are um, if you have a crop share as a landowner, you are an operator, right? You have risk in it. You get your share of your crop shares. So whether it's 1/3, 2/3, you get 33%, 40%, 50%, whatever your split might be. But it also makes you eligible to purchase crop insurance if you want them. You don't have to purchase crop insurance. And it makes you eligible for any government payments if they're paid. So this ECAP money that we got, this emergency commodity assistance program that we got, if you had a crop share, you are now eligible to receive that, and you should have gotten a check for it. If we get any future farm bill payments, this is when you are eligible. So if you are in a cash rent situation and you're wanting a portion of this government payment, you need to go to a crop share. Again, if you're wanting all the income and expenses, what the revenue is, you might consider going to a crop share, because if you're in a crop share, they're a lot more willing to share it with you because you're sharing the risk with the tenant. So what should be shared? My general rule of thumb is yield increasing inputs are shared. So who covers what? Landowners going to pay the land taxes. They probably are owning the irrigation, making any major repairs on it, the depreciation insurance, all of that. Now we are seeing a lot more irrigation equipment being owned by tenants. They come with their own nuances. We have data on how to adjust your cash rental rate. The tenant's going to provide the labor, they're going to cover the field operations and the cost of transporting. So what's shared? Yield increasing inputs. Fertilizer, insecticide, fungicide are shared. Your herbicide is going to be during the growing season, because we're kind of moving past the days of disking the land before planting. So that burn down is typically the tenant's expense. But for the herbicide during the growing season, fertilizer, insecticide, fungicide shared because they increase yield. Same with energy for irrigation. Increases yield, it is shared. And then seed is kind of a tricky one here. It's all over the board. Sometimes it's shared, sometimes it's not. Sometimes a portion of the technology seed is because it reduces fertilizer, insecticide, fungicide, herbicide costs. What I have seen is, when I've crunched numbers, is seed is something that should be looked at potentially sharing. And then both parties are going to market their share of the crop. If you are a landowner and you do not want to market your share of the crop, if you have a standing relationship with your tenant, I think it's okay to ask them to market your share. However, you need to have that trust there. If you're going to be sitting and watching the market saying, Jim, you sold my corn, and if you would have waited 2 days, I would have got a lot more money. If you're going to do that, you can't be asking them. And maybe set some parameters, like, go ahead and market 50% of my crop insurance amount of corn. And then I'll handle the other 50% if you're really uncomfortable with it. Or ask them how they go about doing it. Ask for some pointers. I'm getting a lot of landowners who are inheriting these leases. They don't know how to go and market it, and that's okay. It takes some time to learn how to, but don't be afraid to ask. And if you're a tenant, don't be afraid to answer and tell them about how you market all of your grain. Help them out. It goes a long way in building that relationship.
Okay. All
Which
right.
is,
Wait,
yep.
I just
Um,
want to make, go
Good.
ahead. Why don't we answer just one more question here? I took a read through it and I'll try to respond to it here quick. How
Okay.
does allowing a wind turbine easement on your land affect the written lease if the lease is signed before the easement is signed? So I would assume this is probably going to mean that the lease will supersede the easement, meaning the people that are assigning the easement to the land to build a wind turbine where they might have, say, an access road, or for a year they might have to take up a couple extra acres because they got to have equipment coming in and all this stuff. What's that all mean? Well, what that means is basically the cropland lease probably has to sign before you can sign in good faith uh, the easement to get access to the property to install and build the wind turbine or whatever it might be, unless the tenant voluntarily agrees to give up a couple acres of that land. So maybe some of the crop is destroyed or uh, harvested early or something. And that might mean that maybe as part of the easement that the tenant gets paid out some money to forego harvesting 2 or 3 acres of that crop. But that'd have to be a voluntary thing. Whatever terms you put in that lease are going to go forward with the land until the lease is over. So if you sign a 5-year lease, the person that owns the land dies, well, guess what? Whoever owns that land in the future is also going to own that lease and inherit those terms of that lease. So what communication should be included on this whole discussion of easements and lease arrangements? Just let your land tenant know what you're talking about. If you're considering having a wind turbine built out there, maybe they can plant a short-term crop like a small grain, say oats, for example. Maybe you need to modify the cash rent on a certain number of those acres. Just have an open dialogue on what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And I'll also piggyback a little bit on the wind turbines. Um, it was amazing, my prior job, about the compaction in that area. And so, you're probably going to be looking at some lower yields for the next couple of years unless you plant something like turnips or sunflowers or something like that. So if you're thinking about an easement of any kind, I think it's worth your money to talk to a lawyer as well. Whether that's a rural response hotline or your own ag lawyer, it pays to talk to that lawyer, and it's probably going to save some money if something were to happen. Another cost share question that we got is if a tenant submits a cost share application with NRCS before securing a farm lease to use the land by the tenant. So before you signed anything, they must have submitted an application. How should the landowner deal? My understanding with NRCS is you have to have already that agreement in place, and as a landowner, you're going to need to sign off. The caveat is if you have power of attorney at that office and you gave them full power of attorney, potentially not. But contact your NRCS office, say that you're not okay with it. And it might be time to look at a different tenant, or have that conversation with them saying, I'm not comfortable with this. I wish you wouldn't have done it. NRCS is Natural Resources Conservation District. So if you're getting any tile work done, you have to go through them to make sure it meets all the regulations. Yeah, it's a government agency for conservation. Um, yeah, make sure that's all done. But maybe put it in the lease that they either have permission or not. A lot of times in cost share, crop share arrangements, I encourage them to go ahead and give them power of attorney to sign off on planted acres at the crop insurance or the FSA. But you need to have that relationship first before you do that. I do have a survey out there if you're in a crop share arrangement. My goal is to be able to publish something that says, traditionally a 60/40, 50/50, whatever it is in this region, these are the inputs that are shared. So it's new, it's young. I don't have enough data to publish yet, but if you could fill it out, that'd be great. If you have any other questions, go ahead and enter them in. Um,
Yeah, anybody that wants to consider helping support the farm real estate survey, just know that we have a small foundation that helps this. All it does is pays for the printing and mailing expenses associated with conducting the survey. So feel free to reach out to me and we can get you some more information on that. Let's go to the next slide. Just be aware that we're kicking off a few in-person meetings that we still have room for registration. So just give them a call. Website is highlighted on the top of the slide. We have, I believe, 6 meetings scheduled. We're going to be doing 3 this week and then 2 and then 1 the following week. But tomorrow we'll be in Grand Island at the Hall County Extension Office. Wednesday in Beatrice, and Thursday in Columbus. And also we have several meetings in Fremont, Lincoln, and Omaha coming up in the following weeks as well. The only thing we ask is if you'd like to attend, please call ahead to make sure we are going to be conducting the meeting. If due to lack of attendance, we might cancel or postpone something. And these meetings are free and open to the public, and you're more than welcome to attend at any of the ones highlighted. Let's go to the next slide. Be aware, if you're still on with us, we have the USDA county level cash rent maps will be featured as part of our November meeting series, as well as any taking a look at our ARC and PLC payments associated with the farm programs. Little side note, there's a question that came in, what does NRCS stand for, when Anastasia was addressing the one question? NRCS stands for the Natural Resource Conservation Service with the USDA. They're just a division like the Farm Service Agency, the FSA is. Anastasia will be taking a look at some of the considerations towards the end of leases here for 2026. And if you have a good question, submit it, especially if you think it's a question that would help to benefit just not you, but other people that might be in attendance. So once again, thanks for attending. And do you want to hit the last slide, Anastasia?
Yep. So we do want to just promote this returning to the ranch. It's if you are a farmer or rancher, or you want to go back to your farm or ranch, we encourage families to come to this. Anybody who's a stakeholder, they'll help you through succession planning, how the management of it all, really gets you to have those hard conversations, as the ranch family, whoever's involved, that a lot of times we put off. So if you know of anybody who might benefit from this, I do think registration is coming up soon, the deadline.
All right. I think we're right at time right now. And if you have questions, email, phone us. We'll get back to you today. We got some housekeeping to get ready for our meetings this week, but I'm sure we can squeeze in a quick conversation or an email. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys. Also, there should be a quick little survey that pops up as soon as you exit the screen. We really appreciate if you guys would take the time to take it. It really helps us plan our materials for the future. Also, all of the recordings, including this one, will be up on our CAP YouTube website and available at cap.unl.edu.
All right. Thanks for coming, everyone. Good job, Anastasia. Take care.